How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Javier Gonzalez here. So, in today's video, I want to take a look at this rendering logic tool, which is a to describe the CSS positioning layout. And in order to understand this, right, I want to make a quick recap of how do I get here? What is this? And this is a course taught by Josh Komewa, a software engineering that previously worked at Khan Academy, one of the first companies that built educational platforms to provide mass adoptions or to be as a sidekick in the learning process. So they have all of these materials that you can do in order to understand different topics in the traditional schooling system, right? From kindergarten to first, second, third grades, and so on and so forth until you reach to pre-college. I do find that's very interesting psychic because it is quite interactive in learning things that are quite relevant in our daily life, right? So one of them is not only the mathematics, but also the language, the history, the arts, the chemistry, the biology, the physics, and also more social aspects like the finance and investments, and now getting into the basics of what in a college degree you might need to know to move on in your career, especially in the hard science or the STEAM, right? So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I also add the art as well because this is part of the art was the mother of the science. So, and well, he also worked Matt, Josh Komewa worked on Dan Gatsby, right? So based on his experience, and because React was the first applications used at scale by that company, by Khan Academy. Well, we also need to understand is how the browser actually render all of these elements in a way that for us is very easy to understand, to look at the source of truth. In this case, the docs, not only the MDN docs, but also the spec, and kind of now understanding what is the author's intentions behind this thing called CSS, right? So, well, I make a quick recap of what CSS is at the end of the day, because in order to us to create this kind of web interface like this, as you can see here, and interacting with each one of them, and to now provide a layout of how all these elements should render, right? So HTML provides a structure visually as you want to edit that in a tree or in a DOM-like data structures. The CSS provide now the stylings by applying a set of rules to a particular HTML element or a node. And then with JavaScript, now you can provide the behaviors of your applications, right? So not only in terms of adding interactivity to your applications by collecting data from the user form, for example, or to apply some animations to some certain elements, or to fetch some data from a server, or reading or writing data locally. Perhaps you want to interact with timers provided by the web platform. But in the case of CSS, is at the end of the day, this is a language, despite that a lot of people might not agree with that. All right, but this is more like a mini set of language that allows to describe is how all of these different HTML elements will eventually will be rendered by the browser, right? So because of this, so you have now is different places where you can put these rules. So whether it's externally on the HTML or internal as part of the HTML document, or even in the HTML elements known as the inline elements. And you can define out the rules of how these elements we're going to look like, what is the anatomy of these rules, and how you can now select a particular element using the selectors. All right, what are the type of selectors that we have? So selectors or pseudo-selectors or pseudo-elements, and what are now the possible state that these elements can be. So for example, now with CSS, it allows you to target a particular state of that UI. And this notion, for example, is that, hey, these elements, let's say, for example, in the bottom, it can be in this particular state. It can be on focus, it can be on hover, and this kind of realizations, all right, that might sound initially quite you know. If I look at the CSS MDN right now, well, it's now these introductions of what the CSS allows to do and allows to target here. So this, let me see if I can find that stuff here, at least on the recommendation at the beginnings. Well, in any case, but the point here is that we can use CSS. Let me see if this is part of the open here. I don't see latest stable CSS spec development release. Learn all the web fundamental prerequisites. No, it's not about this. Your first website styling, I think is this. So yeah, and applying the CSS and the CSS basic and improving the text. But again, let's take a look now at the CSS here, because I already have that, and I took some notes out of that a while ago. Introductory article, I think is this. Let me see. There you got it. Exactly. And before that, let me see if fundamentals recap of CSS, which is part of the model 0. Error corrections and a word. Okay. So yeah. All right. So these elements can be in a possible desired state. I would like to now make a quick pause in order to query something or ask something. I'll be right back. All right, and I found it, right? So not only that you can select is a particular HTML element and provide some stylings, right? But also you can select is an element based on a specific information. So for example, it's based on a specific state here, right? And so for example, we have now the hover, right? And all the possible state that we can select here, right? on all of these HTML elements. Why am I hitting a break here? Because as I described later on, there are several of these pseudo elements and pseudo classes that are still relevant despite the modern era of web development, which is using React applications, right? So this is it, right? So you have, so the point of this is understanding and describing this, because now it makes a lot of sense when we need, for example, is perhaps read a ticket or try to solve a particular problem when a company that is building a particular product, they hire you and say, hey, we need to actually make sure to build this, right? So we want to build these SaaS applications, and we want to provide this particular style sheet, right? So I want to match the Figma UI docs here, all right? So that's very that's revealing in order to understand all the possible state that these elements can be, all right? So you also have is this one, so you have the target. And in order to label them, right, it says, hey, you can have now is element display state pseudo classes, all right? So most of us, even including myself, I wasn't aware of this, for example, or the popover open or open, right? So again, this is something that is fairly new, as you can see here, right? And it was like 2 years ago. Holy moly, you know. So it allows you to now target that represents a popover element, and you might wonder what is a popover element. Oh, you got it. So now you have an API for that, and that is with the dialog HTML. All right. So when this dialog HTML now is on the and if you want to take a look real quick here, because I know this is something fairly new for a lot of us. Let me see if I can take a look at an example here like this. So when this element, let me actually inspect here real quick. No, what the French does? All right, so let me inspect now real quick these elements here. There you got it. So if I click here on the button, as you can see, this button is going to now open up a dialog, and it's the browser behind the scene that is say, hey, which dialog I need to show. So for example, this one, right? Now it actually renders at that particular moment. So now it changed from an up to a state open, right? And if you close, for example, if you close, now it changed that little attribute to remove the open. So why am I mentioning and why I hit the breakpoint here, right? So if I look now at the CSS style sheets, right? And if I try to say, hey, let's going to find is an element here, as you can see here, yeah, my model dialog, all right? All of these are now elements that were defined not for myself, but by the whoever wrote this piece of code, right? So if I open up this in a new tab, and then I go back to look at that specific pseudo classes, right? And try to target that element here, right? By saying, hey, let me actually go here And in fact, let's do this. Yeah, let's do this here. That's right. And if I want to say, hey, if the popover is open, all right. Oh my God. If the popover is open, I just want to make the content there. All right. You just want to make the content here, font size, font size to be like 3 root element, right? Make it big, very, very big, right? It's interesting. It didn't attach that or select that. Okay. Because I also, in order to do this, that's not valid CSS. This is valid CSS. Right? Yep. Okay, so if I open up the dialog, no, doesn't select it. All right. What about this? I'm trying to target that element. It doesn't target. Well, let's see how the popover actually works here. Representing a popover element is one with popover attributes. So that is showing the state. You can apply this to a style to popover elements only when they are shown. So because I want to try to add some style here, and that's interesting. When the popover opens, all right. Yeah, I'm trying to use that. Oh, when the popover is open, I need to pass this particularly. Oh, I need to do is this popover event target. Okay, and now this will be is a popover. Okay, so popover, all right, and I need to pass this popover target. Yeah, that'll be my dialog. That's right. Command show model. Nope. Just only here. It's going to open now this popover. Okay. And there you got it. Right. And now I actually modifying is the right element as it is. So why am I mention this kind of stuff, right? So I need to close that. So in order to try to close that, perhaps I might need to command for my dialog. Yeah, command close. Perhaps now the way how this popover work is by using any specific attributes, and that's what it is, right? The using is now a specific attribute to this. And as you can see, when I close it, it actually works because the browser now gives me this behavior. So, for example, this kind of elements, like popover, which is something fairly new, it has like, what, 2 years on existence. It allows you to now show this elements. And that's quite interesting because by using this pseudo elements, which the entire reason of this fairly quickly example here was to show you and even to myself that this is one of the things that CSS allow us. So not only to add style or styling the HTML elements, but also it is possible state, right? And one of those possible state can be is display state as pseudo elements, or even for inputs, or even for linguistic, which is something that I'm not quite well, I wasn't well aware of this, but that's also something that you can do. Okay, so for example, len. All right. So it's going to detect that based on the language that are determined to be that, right? Is the language is on the US, outline is this. But if you have any other language, so is this. That's interesting. And it's trying to reckon, okay, it's based on that property of that. So in any case, so I just want to make this quick overview of the CSS because I want to go is with positioning layout, right? So this is all the combination here. So locations, resource type pseudo locations, right? Playing, pause, seeking, interesting. This is something useful for audio and videos. All right, pseudo class applied to media that is capable of being in a state where it will be described as playing, such as video, or also image. All right, also audio, as you can see. Again, it's something that is not widely available, but it still is something that on the spec it exists. All right, perhaps some browsers here they're lagging, but that's it. Time dimensional pseudo classes. These pseudo classes apply when viewing something which has timing, such as with web VTT caption. Web VTT API. So for example, like current. Oh, and this is on experimental things. Okay. All right. Okay, some experimental things here. Okay, the other is three structural pseudo classes. So now this is more about is the shape of the structure of this. So whether it's on the root is HTML, this is usually the HTML elements, or empty, or end child or last child, something that I'm going to look at later on, and I'm going to describe that because few of them are still relevant in today's web development. So three structural pseudo classes, shadow structure pseudo classes like host matches the shadow tree, shadow host, host and host context, user actions pseudo classes, and here's when things like hover, which is most of the time, focus is another one, right? Functional pseudo classes, I wasn't aware of this. And then you have now has functional pseudo classes. Again, this is something that is still fairly new. All right, since December 2023, this feature works across the latest devices and browser versions. That's interesting. Functional pseudo classes and custom state pseudo classes and page pseudo classes. This is for print and document and view transition pseudo elements here. This is for the view transition API, which is something that is fairly new, right? Why this? Why is this? Okay. Again, why I went through this? Because part of the basics of the CSS, all right, is to understand not only what is CSS, how you can apply CSS to your elements, and these elements are based on CSS rules, and those rules are to modify its properties of that element, and those properties can be is based on its dimension, the font, the alignment of that box, all right, and the color of that box, the background, as well as animations and keyframes, right? Again, as just mentioned, is the most common properties that a box has, which is another interesting segue. Okay, so if I say, hey, what are the most common CSS, the CSS properties? All right, I wanna look at all of them, right? Not just one, all of them. All right. If I go here and say, where can I look at all the CSS property, right? Use several reputable developers, whether it's this, but let me look at this, and also at the spec, by the way. So this idea of exposing yourself to the source of truth, because I am not my intention in today's video and in this series of video is not to memorize this. No, that doesn't work. My intention is that what is the source of truth? Asking questions. So what is the source of truth? Where can I expose myself to the source of truth? And the more I do that, the better off will be for myself and for you who are looking at this content. Because now you can see, not because I'm telling you, you can see actually is the working group, the people that are actually in active development of this. So yeah, show editor draft, like this. So there is a lot. Property. So they organizing it in this way, alternative formats. But as you can see, you have a lot of this. Oh my god. Okay. Jesus. Okay. Okay. Damn. All right. But as you can see here, let me see if MDNs at least try to show CSS custom properties, variables. No. Property, the valid CSS value. Okay. Okay. Cascading values, conditional rules, counter, displays. Okay. All right. Expose myself to the source of truth. Exposing myself to this. So, there are several of these properties. All right. I would like to perhaps later on label all of this, but this property, what it's trying to describe is the box, which is now how the browsers represent all of these HTML nodes, divs, navbar, headers, articles, div, inputs, video tags, audio tags, all of these HTML elements, using is now the box model. So the box model is actually part of the yeah, as I mentioned, how all of these different elements can be represented visually, and that is as a box. And this box model, which contains all of these properties. So not only is the dimensions, but which is the content, the padding, the margin, the border, and the the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, but also additional property like that, right? So for example, it's like, well, how is the background we're gonna look like? What is the content inside here is how it's going to look like? The color of the content, the color of the background, the dimension of this box with the width and the height, right? And this is just to summarize some of this, because again, my time is limited and I have like 25 minutes left to go over this. But the TLDR of this is on the CSS, on these introductions. So first we need to understand what CSS, what it does, how can we use it, whether it's externally or inline or internal or inline, how can we select now an element to actually apply the style that we look like, that we want to? What are the possible selectors that we can have? What are the possible states that we can even select using the pseudo classes, and how that is organizing? So briefly here is whether it is by element displays, all right, which is something fairly new, right? So element display, the input pseudo classes, the linguistic, I didn't know about this, the linguistic, the locations, by times, the tree structural, and here is when things like the first n of type, the last n of type, the first n of child, or the last n of child, okay, are actually very useful for functional pseudo classes, which is something that I'm going to fairly use that more and more and more, right? In view transition pseudo classes, but again, so just to describe what are the possible things here in CSS. And also, if you now take a look at the intro, not the dialogue, and not here, but it's just the intro here, right? Exactly, which is the, let me see, it's like, which is the intro, yeah, the intro. You may wonder why are you looking for? Am I looking at, yeah, I'm looking is at the styling, the content, I think it is. But particularly is CS style basic styles. It was here. Test your skills, advanced cascade layer, so on and so forth. I think they changed this. Yeah, I think they changed this. Yeah, I think they changed getting started. Okay, is here inline styles, basic selector. Okay, is this one? Is this section? Is this section? Okay, is this section? Okay. Okay, yeah. So what is CSS exactly? So getting started with CSS is like, hey, how you can start to use CSS in your HTML. Some of the basic way to select a particular element, whether it's based on the HTML tag or the classes or the attributes, right? Attribute selectors, pseudo classes, an element which is based on a particular state, and all the state that I mentioned before. You can also combine here selectors to actually cherry picking is a bunch of them, right? And also is that now how all of these elements will look like here, which is with the box model. How now the browser represent is all of this HTML node visually, right? What is the anatomy of this box model? Which it says the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, okay, and also what are the things that we can use here? So for example, like functionality that CSS provide to us, like add rules, which is something that I don't know why they don't mention here, but this is something that you can use that. All right. So the typographies, the color, in which is something that they describe here. Yeah, the box model, the cascading effects, the values that you can use here, as well as the the dimensions, the color, and some other additional content as it is, and how you can debug in your CSS. I think they already update this. They don't mention is when they update this, you know, which to me is quite interesting. Quite interesting. Oh, they okay. Oh. Okay, that was okay, that was last year. All right. Okay. Cool. So this is the basics of the CSS, right? And then I move on what are the things that are still relevant according to Josh Kamua, all right? Which is, hey, well, you need to understand is how this CSS rules actually works. What is the definition of those rules, and how you can use that? What is the anatomy of these rules? What are the things that are still relevant despite the current state of web development? And that is, hey, you need to know is the pseudo-elements, how you can select elements, as well as the combinators, some of the state base that are still relevant, like for example hover or focus, or even the pseudo element, or like this tree structure, like the first end of type, last end of type, first and last child, right? Which makes a lot of sense when you're developing these kind of applications, all right? The front end. What are the possible pseudo elements that we can also have? So, for example, like placeholders, or after or before. This is usually this is mainly used for decorations and that kind of stuff. You also need to know is what are the current most common behavior that we use in CSS, like the media queries, all right? There are others as well. So for example, like layer, to specify is that when I use this set of CSS rules on my page, I want you to apply that. I want to apply this layer, right? So for example, if I am on the mobile, I want to apply this layer, or if I am on an iPhone, display this layer, and if I am a tablet or a laptop or a 4K and so on and so forth, you know, you have all of these rules, and so that makes quite sense. The most common ones still are now media queries, and also to understand is the things that are still relevant, like they describe here, like what are the possible values, pixel, root m, and percentage. Why do we even care about that? When can we use this? For example, in the case of percentage, useful for trying to get the value from a previous, or from width and height. This is most likely the case where you want to use this. Root element for providing now accessibility to your users, right? By going to the root fonts of that browser and then move out. And pixels are mainly used for layouts, right? To define that kind of things. So then next is, well, how can I use the colors here? Something that also they define here. I don't know where they define here, but I think it must be on color, which, interesting. Backgrounds and border, no text, backgrounds and border. They don't mention colors, which to me is quite interesting and yet still relevant challenge. Okay, styling tables. Okay, with colors, or at least the color formats, right? They don't mention here, but in any case, So these possible values that you can use in colors for the names for educational purpose, or RGB, or X, or HSL, or now currently is the oklab. All right, and each one of them addressing is a specific problems here. So in the case of HSL, it's like, hey, it is much more intuitive to select the color, right? By following is a particularly is cylinder, right? So when you can select is the huge, the lightness, and the saturations, because this is some mathematical formula that describe this cylinder, but the eye doesn't perceive colors in this mathematical sense, in this true t values, in this true value. It perceives more with nuance, and this is why oklab now, which is another format, is not something quite is something fairly new, oklab color space. This was updating in April what? April 2026. So I think that was the time that I was part of this. I don't know. Yeah, in any case, first published latest version. Oh, latest version. You gotta be kidding me. So again, 2 years ago is it's just too much. Again, it's too recently. So yeah. So the point of this kind of color oklab color wheel is to works more like how the eye actually perceive those colors and how you can describe those colors. Right? A perceptual color space for image processing, and this is a white paper from personal project to industry standards. Introduction adding in 2025. Girl, man, this is our pioneer stuff, bro. This is our pioneering stuff. The browser started to implementing in the color level, the same for game engines and open source, right? And Photoshop. So again, yeah, cool. Also understanding is the typographies. So know what is the web fonts, what is the different formats that we can have in our fonts, whether it's sans-serif or serif, and the web fonts that we can go to actually give now a styling and a branding to a web product, right? So also how you can is use some of these variants of fonts like bold or italic or regular, right? What they describe in, as well as the alignment, the position, the spacing between letters, and the line heights, right? The space between now text on top and on bottom. So this is just to summarize the entire CSS fundamentals. And then now we move to look at the way how all of these different elements are laid out for us, right? So first, by understanding is that initially, because you have all of this variety of browsers where each one of them implement this spec at their own pace, and there was some inconsistency across browsers, we have something called is the Css Reset, to say, hey browser, whoever you are, I don't care your implementations, but let's going to start with this base, right? Most of them are for margins and alignments and and that kind of stuff, right? As the year progresses, most of these browsers now actually stick to the CSS spec, and we still need those CSS reset, but for very specific edge cases, right? So for example, I indicate, hey, the box model that I want to use is now the content, right? And not the border, for example. So because of this, CSS now can pass down some of this. One of the behavior of this value is that you can now pass down some of these properties to nested children's, like fonts and color most of the time, right? In order to align the contents, whether it is vertically or horizontally, so we use now is margins or paddings per positions, but now we can use is based on the content or the language content, which is, hey, is this contents are hands-based characters from China and Asia and all that kind of stuff? If it is, all right, it makes sense that we need to apply now the box model, not horizontally, but not vertically, right? Again, most of the content out there is just horizontally, but the idea is to that CSS support now that, right? So then I also look at what the this inheritance works, and how now competing CSS actually are applied by the browser via the cascade style sheets or cascading effects. And also what is the box model, how the box model is represented, what the box model represents, all right? So how all of, as I mentioned before, so how all of these different HTML elements or DOM or nodes in the DOM actually we're gonna look like in this visual media, right, as a box. So you have now the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, how they behave, how you can actually manipulate its values, and how now the margins behave particularly on the OG layout, which is the flow layouts. And now these boxes they act more, or in the case of this layout, these boxes or the CSS act more like a set of mini language where each one of those layouts apply their own particular rules. So the OG is the flow layout. So this is made of three main components. So you have now the block, which takes all the available horizontal space. It is greedy, all right? You have now the inline elements, which actually takes now all the available horizontal space, all right? And it actually can line break the content if it reaches to a particular endpoint or timeline. And also you have now the inline block, right? And how now some of these particular elements in the HTML elements behave with block, the inline, and the inline block. So technically now elements like image or videos and canvas, they are now inline, and some of them now in these layouts they add a little space at the top, because now they're acting like typography, right? So I also look at a particular example of how to build a simple website, right? A workshop on doing that. And I do find that out is the best way to learn something, not only in theory, but also in practice, is to say, oh, now it makes a lot of sense of how the things works, okay? So So on top of that, right, is that now I also look at how is the dimension calculated in this layout. So whether it is the width or the height, by default, when you don't set the width or the height, in the width, it's gonna take all the horizontal space for the content, right? And you can modify that using some of these values that they give it to you on or instead of this content value. So on the width and the height, you can or even use the values or the percentage values, all right, or the name values. So these percentage values are like percentage or pixels or audio. So pixels, root elements, and percentage, right? Or you can now use the name values, right? So for example, it's like say, hey, make the width of this element fit the content, or max content, or mean content, right? And what it's doing is it's gonna take now, for example, in the case of max content, you say, hey, let me take a look at the widest element width in the children, all right? And that is something that I'm gonna use as my width. So don't take my word for granted. Let's actually take a look at that example. All right, if I go to the code pen here real quick, please give me that, right? And if I say, hey, let me create this div, and then I say, hello world, say loading ipsum dolor s is a text that we use now to on the printing industry as a test case for visual alignments and content alignment. So lorem ipsum dolor s lorem ipsum dolor s, right? So then if I say, hey, this div, okay, I'm selecting that div to say the height, the width of this element in the normal layout, the flow layout, it'll be now is the max content, right? I think it is. No, doesn't work like that. What about this? If I say now this, I think it's because it's loading. If I say, hey, display, no, display, yeah, but the width is say, hey, is max content. I think it's max content. No, I think it's mean context. Say mean content. And what it says is that, and this is something that to me is quite mainly quite counterintuitive, but in any case, it say, hey, I'm gonna make I'm gonna make is the width of this. Okay, I'm gonna make is the okay. I'm gonna make the width of this the mean content. This is a great segue to actually look at that mean content, right? Because sometimes I forgot how to do that, right? It represents the minimum intrinsic size of an element. Okay, minimum intrinsic size. To set an element according to its minimum intrinsic size, set the inline size or width in horizontal writing modes like English and Hebrew to mean content. This sets the elements to the sides. It will be if the text was wrapped as small as possible in the inline direction. Okay, so in the inline direction, this will be in the inline direction, all right? And by inline is that how you read that content is one after the another, right? Notice a block. This is why the direction of reading the content is important, because now this direction is gonna set the foundations of how this content will show off. Okay. This sets the elements to the side. It will be if the text was wrapped as small as possible in the inline direction without causing an overflow, with as much soft wrapping as possible. For a box containing a string of text, the minimum intrinsic value will be defined by the longest word. So in other words, okay, so what this property is going to look or is going to set is what is the minimal intrinsic value of this element, all right? And that'll be is the width. What will be the the minimal intrinsic size of these elements, which is exactly what is the minimum intrinsic size of this element that I can show in an inline direction. Exactly, that I can show in an inline direction. So in other words, is I'm going to look at the content here, right? I'm gonna look at the content of these HTML elements, and then I wanna say, hey, which one of you has the widest dimension? Okay, that is something that is going to use as the width in an inline direction. So in this case is the longest string. This is why, for example, in my case, the longest string is loading $$s. But if I say this and I say, hey, let me actually get an image here, all right? And I want to get a gravatar image here, you know, to pick some web service providing individuals with globally recognized avatars. Gravatar. Public image, you know. Unauthenticating on exactly. So or public image repo, right? Repo. Okay. Oh, but no, that kind of I mean is public image. Yeah, public image web server to show images in the browser. I know I'm being quite redundant. Yeah, but isn't there any public here? I mean, is Jesus. Holy moly. No, I don't want to install that. I just want to. Oh my God, public. Okay, public image. To render on browser, right? Jesus. Gravatar? Okay, and now I'm becoming a bot. Mm-hmm. Oh, do I need to register? No, but can I use now? Jesus. I'll be right back. All right, and we are back. Okay, so look at this. So this is what I want to describe here. It's like, hey, this particular property, where it is? What the French is this? Console source, tick performance memory. Oh my god. Well, let's gonna pick this element here and show the CSS. So what I'm saying here is to CSS, hey, if this is the width, all right, I want to make the width of this particularly element, all right, to take the so I want to make the intrinsic size as they mention here, okay, representing is the minimum intrinsic size, and this minimum intrinsic size is by looking at the widest element in that as a content in the HTML, and that'll be used as my width to show this content is an inline directions. So what does it mean is that it's showing now the text because this element actually is the more widest of all of this, and all of the other elements is just to be now showing in this fashion, right? So this might something that you might want, all right, here, and it'll try to actually is fit the content to that, right? Exactly, as an inline element. This is a interesting question because it say, hey, if this is the div, right, and the div is now a block, well, I want to show all of these elements as it is. Oh, because this should be wrap. Okay, this should be wrap. Yeah, this should be wrap as a paragraph, for example. So if I wrap this into a paragraph, for example, and the same for this, right? All right. So if I wrap this as it is, right? So now the content is going to be showing after that. Okay. But this is just to illustrate that now how you can actually tell the browser, hey, what is the CSS, what is the width of these elements, and also what is the height here, and how the width and the height behave. So by default, when you don't define any height, all right, when you don't define any height, what do you think what will be the value, right? It say, hey, I'm gonna take all the in this case the value of this div, right? It'll be the widest element here. So in other words, this behave pretty much like taking is all the available space for these elements, like a block element, because at the end of the day, that's what div actually works, right? It behave like that. Hey, what is the widest elements here? And that'll be my width, all right? So that's part of the rule here. And in the case of the heights, when you use percentage, it say, hey, I'm gonna take the smallest possible, the small size as possible, right? And if you need to make the elements wide as possible, right, you need to actually pass down from the HTML root further down to that element, all right? So this is something that you're gonna see a lot of in React application and that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is just to describe is this width and height dimensions, how they behave in the normal flow, right? And also another behavior, for example, when you use now margins and how this margin collapse, because there is a several. This is like a huge topic on margins, okay? I'm just going to mention the most common one, which is, hey, all right, how this particular element will overlap here. So margin collapse, the whole point of this is the idea that two overlapping margins collapse into one single area. So the concept is pretty simple, but it's have a lot of corner cases that we should be aware of this, all right? So one of them is that vertical margin collapse. So the bigger margin wins. And among other topics that, again, I won't dive deep into this that much. So, but what I do want to dig in later on, at least not today, is on the other layout mode, which is the position and layout mode. So again, this was a huge overview. It took me like an hour to at least to summarize my ideas and organizing that in a way that makes sense in this sequence. So that's why I'm actually recording this series of videos as a way to organize my ideas, and the same for the storytelling when I need to explain this kind of stuff. So that'll be all for today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.